we architected the day to really, there's almost this crescendo of an increasing amount of real talk, vulnerability, building of psychological safety in the room that really gets you to a point where you're able to really start talking about some of the tougher ideas. So maybe if we walk through, what the experience tends to look like, really at the start of the day, we invite folks to get into, a very self-reflective space.
Welcome to the Manage Self, Lead Others Leadership podcast with Nina Sunday for experienced and aspiring people managers. This show will help you explore ways to become a more intentional leader. Each episode, host Nina Sunday speaks with some of the brightest business minds on the planet who share a passion to elevate and transform team culture. Workplace culture hides in plain sight. Is yours flourishing? Join the movement to make your workplace a better place to work. Are you ready? Because it's time to manage self, lead others.
Martin Gonzalez is co-founder with Josh Yellen of Google's Effective Founders Project, a global research program using people analytics to uncover what makes the best startup founders succeed. They have designed and run leadership courses for thousands of tech startup founders across more than 70 countries in the Americas, Asia, Africa, and Europe. A frequent lecturer at Stanford, Wharton, and INSEAD on organisation design and people analytics. Martin has been at Google for 10 years and is currently a principal of organisation and talent development, shaping team culture. He's qualified in organisational psychology and behavioural science at Columbia University and London School of Economics, and co-authored with Joshua Yellen the brand new book, The Bonfire Moment. Originally from Manila, he's worked in New York, Jakarta, Singapore, Taipei, and today speaks to us from San Francisco. And his first episode with us was episode 132 on his book, The Bonfire Moment. And today's episode is all about the facilitator's playbook for the Bonfire Moment workshop. Welcome, Martin Gonzalez. So how have you been?
Sure. Good. It's been it's been quite a busy few weeks, but we've been very happy with the reception of the book so far. And thanks to folks like you and your amazing podcast, like it's really helped get the word out.
That's great. That's great. And well, it is a win-win because I've actually achieved a little bit of a win myself in the last couple of weeks. I have been named Influential Person of the Year here in Australia, small business. So that was a very exciting evening.
That's amazing. Congratulations. Wow.
Thank you. And I think having wonderful quality guests like yourself on my podcast and the global reach of the podcast really sort of gave me those extra points, perhaps. Who knows?
Well, wow, you've really hustled and kind of built such an amazing following with your podcast. So congratulations.
Thank you. And the other thing I only just found out because another podcaster had to show me, according to Listen Notes, which is a ratings entity, this podcast is in the top 5% globally of all the other podcasts in the world. So
that's fantastic.
So it could be that's why your agent found me. Yeah. That's great. Well, that's absolutely wonderful. So I'll actually start it officially by saying, welcome, Martin Gonzalez.
Thank you for having me again.
And we decided at the last episode that we would record a second episode because we didn't even get onto the Bonfire Moment one-day workshop, which is so amazing. And I think this episode is going to be talking about that. So, but first of all, I know we recorded the episode before the book was published, but then we decided to publish the episode the same day as the book. The book version was published May 14th. So what's actually been happening with the book since then?
Well, we've, the favorite parts of, amazing. The favorite parts of launching this book that I didn't quite expect would happen are, random people reaching out, putting, sharing a photo of them reading it in the beach and saying that, look, like I've been on a walk these past few days listening to your podcast and I've just really enjoyed. So I think a lot of that has been just really, really, really nice.
Yes.
And I think that for me is the main thing. And then there are other things that are, I think, more icing on the cake than anything else. When we launched that week, we hit the USA Today bestseller list. We were number 3 in the business and economics
I saw that.
category. Yeah, so we hit a few other lists too, and Thinkers 50 had named us this book one of the top new management books of 2024. So all of that, look, like all of that is secondary to just the fact that we're finally able to get the word out to as many people as possible, as many founders and business owners as possible, which is really the mission behind this book.
Absolutely. And it's got a lot of new material and it's all evidence-based. So it's a very robust content, and I'll be every class that I deliver, I now included in the recommended reading. Unfortunately, so many leaders now, middle managers, let us say, who are being trained to be senior leaders, when you ask them what's your favorite book, they can't even tell me one. So I think
well, I hope that it's because there's so many to choose from, so many good quality books to choose from, which I don't know. It's been a while since I read a management book and thought, gosh, like that's a really good book.
But today we're going to talk about the Bonfire Moment workshop, and I've got my PDF version of this, so that I could sort of write notes, and there's the QR code. But of course, if you buy the book, you've got it all as well. So, what's been happening with the actual workshop now, the Bonfire Moment, and what do you want to tell us about?
So, so we continue to run the workshop with many startup teams, but I think what has been a really nice outcome of launching this book is a few larger organizations have gotten, interested in the book and in the workshop. And, many of them would approach me with us, with a comment that usually sounds like, we've been wanting to really get back to our entrepreneurial roots. We want to operate more like an agile startup. Like, could we lean on your insights and also possibly your workshop to really unleash some of that in our larger, in our more mature company now? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. Like we actually know that this works in large companies too, and we know that while there are differences clearly between the systems that exist already in a large company and the different caliber perhaps of people that you're hiring in a large company, still so much of this is about the human condition and about just the reality of the humans in a company that just needs to get dealt with, that have a lot of universality to it. So we've been busy working with a few of these other larger companies, trying to embed some of these ideas and the workshop into their operations.
And you've made it open source. What exactly does that mean? It means that people can run the workshop without having to pay a commission or buy it, or tell us.
This is exactly it. The idea is that we've written the book so anyone can pick up the book, read it, and basically run it themselves for their teams. Now, the thing that I would say is, because that was the design goal, we had to, we significantly simplified the way one would run it. In the appendix of the book, we actually have a facilitator's playbook that would include things like, well, if this is a larger group or if it's a virtual environment, and all these other different ways that you would customize the workshop as it's written up in the book. Like, we offer then a few ideas on how you might tweak it. The other thing too, that
it's better than any field guide I've ever had to teach from. If someone else gave me their content, select a date and block it from 9 to 5. Ideally, choose a Friday. Keep all the calendars clear. You'd have a checklist of everything to notice. So, really, really good.
Great, thank you.
But let's get into the content of it. I mean, the logistics of it are down to a pinpoint. But you've got 4 blocks, and I've got my little notes there. I'll just say them as a bit of an overview. Face hard truths, notice hidden dynamics, drop the masks, resolve unspoken issues. And of course, it's
Yeah.
good to leave resolve unspoken issues to the end because it takes a little while for people to warm up, for people to go, hey, that's not happening in my area, and then to feel psychologically safe enough to talk about it. But then, of course, you've got time to actually, you can refer back to all the content that you've been teaching them up until then. So you've delivered
Yeah.
this how many times, Martin?
Countless. I can't even keep track. And at some point, there were versions of this. And, maybe for the benefit of your listeners who maybe didn't hear the first interview, the reason why we
I'll
wrote
just
this
say
book.
it's episode 132, episode 132
132.
on Manage Self-Lead
Yeah.
Others. Yeah.
Well, and the quick recap is that, at some point when we were running this workshop all across the world, it had taken a life of its own. And, founders would come back to us a year later and say, hey, we took your workshop. We did a bootleg version of it in our own local language, and we've now run it for all these many startups. And so at some point, it got really difficult and impossible to track how many people and countries this had touched. Although we did have this one feedback form that somehow still got used by all the many people who facilitated the workshop. And we checked it and we found that it had reached founders in 70 countries at the point that we were writing up the book. So so this workshop has
What's some of the weirdest far away remote countries you can think of? Because my podcast goes there. Azerbaijan, Saudi Arabia.
Yes, definitely. We've gone there. Croatia. Well, Croatia's
Yes,
a big.
we go there. Latvia.
Latvia as well. I remember Kerry O'Shea, who's one of our facilitators, went there himself to deliver the workshop.
And of course, Malaysia, Singapore, all those places.
All around Southeast Asia, a bunch of countries in Africa.
Uganda,
Latin
Tanzania, Kenya, they all listen.
All of that. Yes. Yeah, and it's been such an honor of a lifetime to be able to kind of bring a lot of these ideas to those corners of the world. So we're super psyched about this. If I were to maybe introduce the workshop, really the workshop is this 8-hour intense experience. We call it the Bonfire Moment, not because it's not the most comfortable and it's not a warm and fuzzy kind of experience. And so we were very clear not to call it a campfire moment, but rather a bonfire moment. And really for us, the difference is that a bonfire is this raging, it's the raging heat of a bonfire. And the analogy really is this idea that building a company often feels like you're in the fire, like you're dancing in the flames. And this is the one day we ask you to do in a year, as early in the life of your company as possible, to then step out of that fire together as a team and examine it together and, bandage up relational wounds, talk about the unspoken issues, and then prepare for that next push as a team before you jump back into the fire, so to speak.
Yeah.
And really at the core of the workshop is we invite people to really challenge their theory of success. That I think would be, if I were to summarize the workshop, it would be to challenge your theory of success. So we all have, a theory, a guess, a hypothesis on what it takes to be a successful founder, entrepreneur, leader, manager, what have you. One of my favorite parts of the book that I very fondly wrote up, and I have a photo here by my desk. It's actually a photo. I need to finally put it in a proper picture frame. But this is a photo of surgery that happened in the 1800s. Okay, and what's interesting, and I share this photo with a lot of my listeners, and for those who are listening through audio, I'm showing a photo of 4 physicians, surgeons, who are all wearing what looks like their street clothes. And really what happened during this time was they would come into a surgical theater, and they would, in their street clothes, they would come in, they would have the needles that they would use to suture up on their lapels, and they'll go about the work without anesthesia, nothing, go about like amputating the leg or working on some part of it. And then, if as they're bandaging up, if a bandage falls to the floor, they'll pick it back up and bandage things up. When they're done, they'll put the death rate of these surgeries were so high that you had to prepay before you go into the surgery. You had to pay before you start the surgery because they would otherwise not be able to collect, because they know that most of the time people die. Now, they thought that the way to become more successful and to address this death rate was to have more sophisticated surgical methods. Let's think of different tools that we can imagine. And what they didn't realize, and it almost took someone who was not in the surgical practice. It took a biologist to discover, Pasteur, that what really was causing death was infection, and what was causing infection were these invisible germs.
Yeah.
So the germ theory was born, and this was a significant change in their theory of success, right? Theory of success A was more sophisticated methods, but then the correct theory of success was, well, the germ theory, and you had to rethink about having antiseptic environments and making sure that everything was clean, wash your hands, basic things that didn't feel as sophisticated as new surgical methods. But when they then implemented these ideas, these very basic ideas, then you start to see the rate of, the error rates or the death rates drop. Now, I share this because in many ways, the way we approach our work in companies, we have our own theory of success. And without the right tools, without the right structured environment and the right maybe quality feedback, we won't be able to, check and revise perhaps our theory of success. And that's what we try to do through the bonfire moment.
Oh, well, I'm just I'm still thinking about that whole image. And if you want to see the image, you can go to Spotify, the Spotify channel, and also our YouTube channel, because we'll see it there. But that whole metaphor is so wonderful. So thank you for that. And
Yeah.
so basically what you're saying is that you have to actually find the root cause and not just deal with surface improvements, but really understand what the hidden root causes.
That's right. And hidden is the right term here, because I find it in my work, and I'm sure in your work with the leaders, we're all victims to our own ideas, expertise, or lack of self-awareness. And it
and
takes,
I was going to say that block 4 is resolve unspoken issues. So the whole day is about what are the norms that we operate by, that maybe if you go to another company, they don't have the same norms at all, but you've just all taken it for granted. That's how it operates.
Yeah.
But that may not be to the good of all. It may have some unintended consequences, and also miscommunications, which is often a source of conflict.
Yeah, 100%. And so the day, kind of at your point, like, and I think you caught it really wonderfully. We architected the day to really, there's almost this crescendo of an increasing amount of real talk, vulnerability, building of psychological safety in the room that really gets you to a point where you're able to really start talking about some of the tougher ideas. So maybe if we walk through, what the experience tends to look like, really at the start of the day, we invite folks to get into, a very self-reflective space. We invite them to actually fill out, a self-assessment form. There's an option to do a 360-degree feedback survey. And you could access all of this through our website. But it invites them to then...
one that is the QR code that we suggested people do.
That's right.
Last time, yes. And I think I've got my printout here. It looks like that.
This is right. Yeah.
So for those watching the video, a few minutes in, I'm showing the printout of mine, so you get to know my
That's right. So what we do here is we ask people to really think about how they stack against what we've discovered in our research of effective founders around the world to be like the top strategies that they deploy to be effective in their work as a founder, as an entrepreneur, as a leader. If you decide to do a 360, which in kind of industry lingo means that you invite, peers, direct reports, perhaps your managers, 1 or 2 levels above you. If you were a CEO, then you would invite people in your board, your investors, invite them to provide feedback, and that gets even richer, because then you start to see, where perhaps your blind spots are as a leader, and that's the first block. And so already there, it's really a moment to really face a lot of the hard truths about how you lead.
Well, what I found interesting is there's no big opening. It's actually a bit of solo work with a partner for a little while.
Yeah.
That's how it opens. It's like it starts really gently.
Well, and you might say it starts with almost zero fluff. Like we just get straight into it, and really it's acknowledging that startup teams are under immense amounts of pressure and they're very time starved. So what we've done really with this workshop is we've really whittled it down to really the core, the things that really drive home a lot of value for participants. So yeah.
And learning comes with relaxation. So you almost get into a little bit of a meditative state because you come in, you've probably rushed to get there, rushed to finish things so you could be in the room. And then you've got a chance to just settle down and just look at your printout and discuss it quietly with a partner and get some insights, because they probably just printed it off and saw it and went, oh, yeah, I'll check that later.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I think what you're alluding to, Nina, is so either you sit down with the partner, or the way we wrote it up in the book was you actually get into a coaching circle. And what's what I think a lot of our participants have found really unique about how we run this coaching circle is so imagine a group of about 4 or 5 people.
Right.
One person will be given a 20-minute segment to really talk through the areas that they feel that they need to be much better at, to question their theory of success. And through that time, they're asked, okay, so what do you want to focus on? What have you started to do to address this? And then we ask them to turn their seat around and eavesdrop on the rest of the group, really solving the problem that the individual is facing. And we find that by doing that, you get really a lot of fresh ideas, because then the group isn't beholden to like making sure that your facial expression is positive or that you're accepting the idea. So we really ask them to share as many ideas as possible. And that really constitutes the first block. And you're really, at the end of that moment where you're able to troubleshoot some of the challenges in your leadership, that takes you maybe 2 or 3 hours into the experience.
And the facilitator, obviously it's facilitated, is urging people to be truthful, to be honest, and don't fib.
Yeah.
Don't be under self-delusion. Try and be as honest as possible. And are the other participants encouraged to maybe, they may know them and go, oh, you say this about yourself, but really, is that true? I mean, do you encourage people to be a little bit politely, courteously, but a little bit, well, come on, let's face reality here. I'm not sure you're always like that. They say really great things about themselves.
And this is the beauty of, laying out the problem space and then stepping away somehow from the conversation by turning your back to the group and just listening in on what the group thinks about the problem. And this is a time where, someone who maybe is your teammate who's in that circle might say, if I were Nina, I would ask the following questions, or I would think about whether so and so is, or this and that are actually true in their assumptions. So it becomes a really good space, a good way, a good structure for people to then really weigh in and help uncover some of these blind spots.
Is any of this workshop on video somewhere, or will be perhaps?
So we have a short video overview, but not of the actual workshop.
Right.
As you can imagine, we get into really raw, so if we had a video, we would have to have actors role play, which also just makes it a little bit trite, a little bit cheesy. But a lot of this touches on really sensitive topics. So no, we don't have a video as such.
All right. So that video overview, is that a link that I can include in the show notes or not yet?
Yes. Yes. It's actually a new video we just released a few weeks ago. And so you'll find it on our website, and I'll send you a link to that, to that specific page.
Now you give the time for each of the blocks, and they're pretty well the same. Block 1 is face hard truths, and it's 2 hours, 5 minutes. Then you have a break, and then it's block 2, notice hidden dynamics. Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So this is where you are invited to then fill out what we call a user guide. Now, this isn't something that we made up. This is something that actually a lot of Google leaders have written up and share, across their teams. And really the user guide, kind of think of the analogy of, buying a printer or a phone where it comes with some instructions. It's kind of a way to install, uninstall, troubleshoot this gadget. And the idea is the same with, with us. Like, here's a manual that really makes explicit things like, why am I here? Why am I here building this team and working on this, in this company, in this startup? What are my motivations behind it? What are ways that you can get the best out of me or the worst out of me? How do I like to give and receive feedback? If we got into
Yes.
conflict, how would we go about that? And
Yes,
these are
I'm on
all
that
these.
page now. Yes.
That's right.
Except that I think you probably get people to bring a device, maybe an iPad or something, so they can type it in rather than put it on paper. Is that how it works? Or
Well, yes, they could do that. Or really, we love the analog, paper and pen. So whenever
I
I
think
run
that's
it,
good
I
for
always do
learning.
paper and
Yeah.
pen. Yeah, yeah,
But is it sort of little boxes like that in the user guide as it is?
that's right.
Yeah, yeah. Great.
Yeah, that's
Mm.
right. And so with that, we're able to, get them to write it up and then share across the group. And this is kind of a working lunch at this point. But we found that this user guide really lives on beyond the bonfire moment. It becomes a good document. Some startups have told us that we've uploaded scans of this in our kind of in a shared drive, or we would type it up in an internal website. And if I need to give feedback, to someone, and I'm unsure, I'm a bit nervous how to go about it, I could then consult their user guide, and it gives me a little bit of confidence and like, okay, this is how they want to receive feedback. Okay, if I follow that playbook, then they'll be more open, less defensive.
Let's take a moment while I tell you about our podcast partner, Segwick. Want to unlock the full potential of an all-in-one CRM beyond just data storage? Want to scale and grow with automated business processes? Meet Segwick, the new CRM designed for complex sales, onboarding and customer management, an all-in-one platform transforming how you manage customer interactions. In episode 134, Pete Romano, the business automation architect who designed Segwick, provides tools for scheduling appointments, managing client follow-ups, handling customer queries, all in one intuitive interface. And here's the good news. For a reduced fee on your subscription, contact segwick.com/Nina Sunday. That's SEGWIK. So visit segwick.com/Nina Sunday today. Now back to the episode.
Okay, this is how they want to receive feedback. Okay, if I follow that playbook, then they'll be more open, less defensive.
This is fantastic because this page I'm looking at, you've got 3 questions. I can sometimes be misunderstood when, and you fill it out.
Yeah.
The best way to give me feedback is to, and you jot it in. And when I get into conflict with others, the best way to resolve it with me is to. Now, does that mean we allow colleagues to actually consult someone else's user guide if they wish to, or?
Yeah. And the idea is that this user guide becomes, I guess, a resource for the team to tap into.
Really nice.
Yeah.
The closest we've been doing that is maybe using a profile like DISC or Myers-Briggs, because then if you know what profile they are, then you kind of have a shorthand. But this is being very specific, and I love it. Absolutely love it. Mm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these like psychometrics become really useful, but I think it's one step removed. Like, you'd have to interpret. Okay, if this person is, I can't remember now the disc, is it like red energy or something like this?
Yeah,
or,
well, sometimes there are colors, but it's mostly D is dominant or direct, I is influencing, S is steadiness or stabilizing, and C is compliance or conscientiousness. Yeah.
Right. Got it. Okay.
And people are always a mix of all 4, but one
that's right.
predominant. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember taking that about 15 years ago now. And so it becomes a useful guide as well. But then you have to almost translate it to, okay, in this moment, if they want to receive feedback or I need to resolve a conflict with them, like, how do I go about that? And I think the user guide gets into a bit more of the gritty detail of like, how do I do that?
All right. So block 3 is drop the masks. Ho, 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 ho.
Yeah.
Not everybody's willing to do that, are they?
That's right. So block 3 really comes back to a chapter earlier in the book that we
Yes.
call the trap of confidence.
Right.
Um, and it talks about how this relationship with overconfidence and underconfidence is a big part of the journey that any leader will have, any person really will have. And really what the research has shown, both our data and data from other fields, is that confidence tends to be highest at the beginning of the journey. Founders almost require it. Like you almost
Yeah.
need to be blind to the true cost of what it would take to do something. Because if you knew exactly what it would take, you would never
Well
start, right?
said. It's kind of golden
So
handcuffs, isn't it?
that's right. And in fact, there's this interesting economist from Harvard. He talks about the law of the hidden hand, which is he studies all these large capex initiatives, such as building bridges or airports and whatnot, and and he finds that he asks the question, like, why is it that all these these massive projects are always over budget and never get accomplished on time? And he talks about how exactly this, like, there's almost an amount of delusion that is required for any large investment to get started. And then what we know from the data is that as people get marginally better at doing that work, then they get this massive dip in confidence. And many times, many of them will interpret this drop in confidence as a signal of future failure. But we know that it is instead actually a signal of growth. And so that precipitous dip that people experience, after those early days,
Yeah.
because this is the time where you mask up. This is the time where you need to protect your ego and you need to make sure that people that you look like you didn't make a mistake in starting this or in raising money from friends and family. And so this third block team to really reflect on, like, what are the deep insecurities I bring, the self-doubt that I bring to the work, and what are the ways in which some of that shows up in the form of a mask, or kind of, to use the language, in the form of like the BS we put out into the world. And so we invite people to reflect on three common ways we've seen founders and leaders really wear these masks. So the first is false is false optimism, which is presenting yourself as very positive, helpful, wanting to make sure people are at ease and are comfortable.
Mhm.
So that's the first, false optimism. Then there's false strength, which is, do I show up trying to maybe project prestige and dominance, and maybe showing that we've succeeded before and we will succeed again now. And then there's false detachment, which is presenting yourself as maybe incognito, trying to be out of the limelight, showing calm and independence. Now, we all wear some version of these three masks, right? And so we invite founders and leaders to really think about, teammates to think about, to what extent do you wear each of these masks? Like, I'll tell you, Nina, like, my mask is false strength. Like, I lean on research because in many ways it makes me a little bit more invincible. And see, none of these are completely wrong. Like, some of these actually become strengths in some
Well, it's
ways.
good because it shows your work is evidence-based, and some people, they just pluck it from the air.
Well, this is true, but then I have, then people who work with me will sometimes wonder if all I am is a walking encyclopedia, as opposed to someone who actually cares about them and cares about building the team. And so, and I've, and I'll tell you, like, my wife has told me once, early when we were dating, she said, sometimes I feel like I am just another subject in a study that a psychological study that you're doing. And so, in some ways it's a strength, but it also becomes, it contributes to maybe some negative dynamics amongst your collaborators.
Well, I'll tell you something, Martin. I have a friend that someone said to me once, "Oh, that, whatever his name is, oh, he's just a walking encyclopedia." I said, "Yes, isn't it wonderful?"
Yeah.
I love walking encyclopedias, Martin. You're on my number one list.
But on a Friday night where you just want to,
Oh,
relax and watch Netflix, maybe not, huh?
True.
But yeah, and so the idea is that we give each person time to share with the group the insecurities I bring to the work are blank because, and this is how I mask, this is the mask I tend to wear. And here's maybe a story that, that maybe brings to life a little bit how this first came true. And in that chapter, in chapter 10, where we talk about this third block, Josh and I, we say that as a facilitator, the way you create the conditions where people can feel vulnerable and open is you should go first. And so in maybe the most public way possible, we go first through in chapter 10, and Josh and I tell our own, BS circle story.
That's fantastic.
Deep in the book.
Like your own masks and your own unspoken issues that you were able to resolve. And you know what? That's exactly correct, because I have, when I'm doing leadership workshops, I have a little module called the rookie mistakes I made as a new leader. And I really go through 5 things that I used to do that I no longer do, that I found out was no way to lead a team. But yeah, so it's good to fess up, because then you are human, but also you're proving with growth mindset that that's not just the way you are. You can modify your behavior, and you can change with education and self-awareness and the desire to grow, the desire to be the best leader you can be.
Yeah, exactly. And this idea of I think I may have mentioned this in our last conversation, but this idea of knowing yourself is really incomplete advice. For me, it's know thyself and then get over thyself. That I think is the right bundle of wisdom, right?
Yes. Well, so there's a few phrase carryovers or carry-alls for that. There's a thing called servant leadership, the humility of a leader. So it's all about being a leader that has that humanity and that ability to not believe they have to be the font of all knowledge. They actually bring people on board and see that, well, nobody is smarter than everybody. And if you put the team together, you've got synergy.
This is exactly right. In the chapter we talk about the chapter of confidence, we actually talk about some really interesting data that looked at leaders both in the US and in China. So the findings seem to at least travel those two, I guess, paradigms, if you will. And they looked at overconfident leaders versus humble leaders, and they asked who tends to be more effective. Well, the data shows that humble leaders are marginally more effective. But then what they found was that there's this third kind of leader that was this humble confident, this leader with confident humility that does even better than the humble leader. And what that means is that you're confident in the mission, that you are clear that this is going to add value to your users or to the world, but you're humble enough to know the limits of your abilities, and that you're able to lean on others for help. You're able to share very openly, where your weaknesses are. And then you'll have teams rush in and really fill in your gaps and really help you through. And so what you want really to be is this confident leader that is bent towards humility.
Lovely, lovely. We're sort of coming to a close of our discussion, and I've been really enjoying it. Can you give me an example of, without naming names, of course, of an unspoken issue that was able to be resolved by the end of the workshop?
Yeah. So, one of the issues that comes to mind was this founder he was considered to be like an absentee leader, constantly away. And what happened was turns out he had pre-recorded a bunch of podcasts and interviews, which then got released, a week, 1 week after another, across a span of 2 months. And it created this perception in the team that, is our CEO just out in front of media, just constantly whining and dining the press? There's real work we need to be doing here. And by the way, at the same time, you have these other co-founders who feel wow, this CEO is now kind of the face of this work, and he's kind of stealing the limelight and not giving somehow credit to the rest of the company. And it was a good moment where the CEO was able to clarify that, one, all of this was pre-recorded, and two, that he was actually busy raising funding for the company, and that three, that a lot of these invitations by these media outlets really requested for one person, and they had to really clarify who would be the spokesperson for the company. And I think a lot of that resolved a lot of the tension that many of the co-founders were feeling, because a lot of this was just not spoken about openly.
Isn't that funny? Because I'm not suggesting that in that particular instance, the person was withholding information, but often leaders think that people understand their good motivations, but people aren't mind readers. And if they don't know the motivation behind certain behaviors or activities, they'll make up their own stories and often pick the negative one.
Indeed. I mean, we are all heroes of our own story, right? And everyone else might sometimes be the villain. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, we'll close the conversation at this point. It's been absolutely wonderful, Martin. What do you want to say to any facilitator from a company that wants to put on this workshop? How can they get the best guidance? We can put the link to the video in the show notes. You got to buy the book. Do people in the workshop also get copies of the book ideally?
Ideally, yes. So
it's like
the
textbook.
The book stands on its own. And so people who want to facilitate this can just really read the book. And then also we understand that some people would love to get maybe trained up and certified in this. So we're actually launching a facilitator certification program later on in the year. And what you could do is you could go on our website and signal interest in it. And perhaps at some point we bring this, to different parts of the world. At some point there could be a virtual version of this. But if you're interested, do let us know. And hopefully this could become a credential that also could allow you to do more of this work. You want to join us in this mission.
And tell us that website, and I'll also have it printed up in the show notes.
Yeah, so it's www.bonfiremoment.com. And if you go to the workshop tab, you'll find the video in there. You'll find the form that you can fill out to signal interest.
And is there any? There was a special offer for the assessment back in May when.
So we will continue to make that offer at least till the end of the year.
Right. Get in now.
So
get that self-assessment. And we'll have there's a tab for that, for the self-assessment as well. At that, now it's Bonfire Moment. It's not the Bonfire Moment, right?
It's bonfiremoment.com.
Yeah, lovely. Elegant work, Martin. Definitely, it changes the game. It's a real eye-opener. It's really moving the needle. Very impressed. Well done.
Thank you,
Marvelous
Nina.
work.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much, and I appreciate all your support.
I love it. Thank you so much, and maybe see you next time. Okay.
Yes, I'll see you next time.
This episode, we've been speaking with Martin Gonzalez on the Manage Self-Lead Others podcast. You'll find a link to Martin Gonzalez and Josh Yellen's book, The Bonfire Moment, in the show notes, plus links to contact. And Manage Self-Lead Others episode 132 was where we discussed the book, and this episode was discussing the leadership playbook for the Bonfire Moment workshop. And I also feel confident you'll enjoy going back to listen to episode 106 with one of our partners, Daryl Martin, on how to become a funded trader, and my multiple conversations with Dan Silverberg on his Leader Operating series, and the fact that he has a leader council these days. And remember to use my code Nina Sunday to unlock a listener discount. I'm your host, Nina Sunday. Connect with me on LinkedIn with a comment about how you enjoy the show. And you can go to Apple or Spotify podcasts to rate it 5-star, perhaps leave a short review. Thank you for listening. Until next time, bye for now.
Nina Sunday is on a mission to help leaders transform culture. To book Nina Sunday CSP to speak at your conference, visit ninasunday.com to request a proposal. Nina travels from Brisbane, Australia for in-person presentations Australia-wide. Twice certified virtual presenter, Nina Sunday presents virtually, globally, for any time zone.
This whole thing began as a 20% project. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with this, but Google allows us to engage in some passion projects on the side. outside of our core role, but somehow connected to Google, right? And so the Google for Startup Accelerator was being built about 9 years ago. And I wanted to volunteer. I wanted to spend time, giving back to my community. At this point, I had just come out of a really demanding job at the Boston Consulting Group, and a lot of my peers were all founding companies. They would frequently call me asking me, Martin, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I thought, well, why don't I contribute in a more structured way? And when I plugged into the accelerator program, we had a lot of great content around machine learning, like the engineering topics, sales and marketing, etc. And there was nothing on people and culture. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Let me dig into the data. That's kind of my go-to. And then I find that there is research that's been done and it's been replicated over a few decades that ask the venture capitalists, if you think of the startups that fail in your portfolio, why have they failed? And the number one reason, time and time again, in fact, 65% of startups fail because of people issues. And that's co-founder conflict. That's not getting the right people on the team, not keeping the right people, not addressing toxic behavior early enough. And to your point, when we started to run this workshop, it was a very basic workshop that we piloted in Jakarta. It received some really strong reviews, and we thought, surely there's some anomaly here. Let's try it again. So we bring it to Bangalore, and again, it receives this really positive feedback. We bring it to Sao Paulo, and at some point, it takes a life of its own. Now, you ask the question, is this just for startups? And the resounding answer is no. Actually, we find that when we then run these workshops in larger organizations, whether it's at Google or in other nonprofits, for instance, across the world, a lot of the ideas resonate. And what we've found is that while they're not a startup in a strict sense, so many teams are actually under startup-like pressures. It's teams that have
initiatives. There's a new division.
Exactly.
There's restructures. There's amalgamations. So there are new beginnings all the time.
All the time. And I'll tell you, this is the combination, right? It's big goals, motivated teams, and then tight constraints, and then you have a startup.
That's right.
So that's everywhere. Yeah.
So how do startups have a people problem?
So, what I find when I work, especially with these maverick innovators who just want to build the future, right? Many of them come into this work obsessing over a problem to solve, and then obsessing over the technology that's needed to solve that problem. Very quickly, they realize that the moment they hit a certain milestone, they now need to build a team around this idea. And then they realize that ideas are not nearly as important as good execution.